When I decided to make this move, I had no idea what I was doing. I was so lost. I still am, in a way, in finding my way. But I had faith and I had trust in myself. And even when people, and people around you are like, what are you doing with your life? It was faith. Even my mom, she was like, so after a year, when do you find a real job? It was difficult. I also struggled financially for quite some time. And I had to learn to ask for help again.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Lost and Found, a podcast that explores the creative relationship between our inner and outer worlds. It's a creative exploration through stories, insights, resources, and tools to help you intentionally design your life and work. I'm your host, Brooke Eston, also known as the Creative Amplifier. I'm part strategist, part designer, part coach, and part artist. And I'm dedicated to helping fellow creatives bridge the gaps between those big dreams and practical realities. Now let's get into it. Our guest today is Ana Juma. She is an artist and creative entrepreneur whose work is transforming the world of journaling. From her YouTube channel to her workshops to her private containers, she helps people use the medium of journaling as a powerful tool for personal growth and well-being. Juma founded Prophsee, an independent journal and book publishing house that brings together a community of creative minds to express themselves through beautiful writing and reading experiences. Her first guided journaling product, My Life Journal, is a beautifully crafted, elegant journal that integrates positive psychology as it guides you in creating a more meaningful and intentional life. Juma and I met back in 2019 through a program called Evoke, which was run by Rachel Rosito. We participated in a women's retreat in Italy together, and she was generous enough to have gifted every single one of us her new My Life Journal. But Juma wasn't always the creative, grounding, stable mental health advocate that she is today. Born and raised in Portugal, she was an introverted yet highly creative child who fell into the all too familiar trap of living a life based on the expectations of others rather than what she truly desired. Join us on an exploration of what our lives could look like if we embraced being a beginner and learn to tap into our higher selves so that we could better serve others. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found. I am so thrilled to have you on this show today.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm so happy to be here.
So one of the reasons that I invited you in particular onto this podcast is because I have been peripherally witnessing your creative transformation. And I first encountered you, I believe, when you were working for Mindvalley, which seems like one of the coolest jobs in the world, at the coolest companies, meeting the most badass people, living in Bali, kind of living the dream. And since you and I have connected deeper, you have left Mindvalley, you have started your own company, and you're producing products that are focused on helping people discover themselves in a deeper way and design and maintain a lifestyle that really supports them in that. So it felt like a no-brainer to ask you to share your process of creative transformation with us. And yeah, I'm super thrilled to just get into it with you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. One of the first memories I have, I was maybe like 4 or 5. I was having dancing classes, music classes. I would play piano and also acting. Yeah, and then in my teenage years, you start having some beliefs and pressures. I tried to go to some castings. I even did some soap opera here in Portugal. And I started developing 2 limiting beliefs. The first one is that I was not talented enough. And the second limiting belief is that this idea of starving artists. I won't have an abundant life. I won't be financially stable. Then when I was 18 and I was about to go to college, I had to make a decision. And so I decided to go to marketing because I thought, well, what is actually creativity? Creativity is not necessarily, being an artist when it comes to making art, right? What if creativity is all about connecting the dots? It's about finding new ways to express myself and find solutions. And so I was like, you know what? I'll just do marketing because it's like the sweet spot maybe between, being realistic and still being creative. So totally a shadow artist.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you were exploring the range of creative possibilities and expressions for you when you were younger, would you describe the environment that you grew up in as being particularly creative, or your parents or your community encouraging and supporting your own creativity? Or like, was that the moment where these ideas of, yeah, that's like a nice to have, but the must is financial stability and a clear path and all of that stuff? What was your communal dynamic like as you were developing those beliefs?
I mean, they were actually the ones who encouraged me in the first place to, have my piano classes and dancing classes. But hey, it's just a hobby, just something that you do, to develop some of your skills and, personality traits, just a practice. Yeah. But that's not real life. And I also grew up struggling financially as a family. And I remember seeing how that would worry my parents.
I think there's something that continues to come up in the interviews that I'm doing for this podcast and just the conversations that I'm having all around this topic. And it is that connection between creativity and financial security and stability. And this idea that so many of us have that in the creative space, it is an extreme. Either you sell your work for hundreds of thousands of dollars and you're successful, or you are a starving artist who is struggling, and the only way to cope with that is self-destruction that usually comes up in the form of some type of addiction, right? And there's no in between. Your story seems to already highlight the dichotomy. So do you have a sense of where that belief came from?
Honestly, I think that it's a belief that is coming from our cultural background. And even today, I'm not yet 100% comfortable calling myself an artist. It's an ongoing journey.
Can you share a little bit from your perspective, perhaps how you feel the difference between being creative or being a creative versus being artistic or being an artist? Like, do you have a sense of where the line is between those two things? Because it sounds like they feel different for you.
They do. It feels like an artist is someone who creates art full time, right? And now it's a matter of defining what is art.
Yeah.
Right. I remember a friend of mine saying, yes, Juma, you're an artist and your art is designing life. And then a creative is someone who combines creativity with business.
It reminds me of an experience that I had, because I am a painter. Like, I'm a professional creative. That's how I make most of my money, and like the C with or creator with a capital C, web designer or whatever. But I'm also a painter, and I've had shows all around the world. And I had a really interesting confronting experience around this topic in particular when I was having a show in San Francisco, and it was in a wine bar in North Beach, a few blocks from my house. And I remember it was a Friday night, and the owner of the bar called me and he said, "Hey, I sold one of your paintings. What do I do? Like, do I give it to them now? Do you need to arrange a pickup? Like, how do we do this sale process?" It wasn't a gallery, it was a bar. And I said, oh, great. Yeah, no, I'll come in right now and I'll bring another painting to replace the one that, this woman can take home tonight. So I go in there and, it's midnight perhaps on a Friday night in San Francisco in a bar. And I walk in with a painting. And there was this woman who clearly had been drinking for several hours. And when I walked into the bar holding the painting, she turned to her friend and loudly said, oh my God, that's the artist. I have to go talk to her. I didn't recognize in that moment that she was talking about me. Like I heard it. And I was literally in the bar in my show holding a painting, like I just made a sale. And even in that experience, I didn't identify with my artist identity. I called myself a painter. Or yes, I made these, I did this. But there's a difference between claiming the noun and claiming the verb, right? Like I paint or I make art is different than I am an artist or I am a painter. And I'll never forget that because she did come up to me and start talking to me. And it was, she had been heavily drinking. So it was a strange interaction. But in any case, when she came up to me, I observed that disconnection in myself. And it's something that I've reflected a lot on in my own journey. But there is something so potent about these labels that we give ourselves. Yeah. And the cultural story piece also. I interviewed another person maybe 2 weeks ago named Corey Iris or Corey Johnson. He had something really interesting to say about that cultural story of the starving artist. He predicted that limiting belief and that cultural myth was dying because we don't need permission from gatekeepers anymore because we have social media. So the idea of claiming yourself and fully stepping into your artistry, we're doing that on social media. And as someone who's such a master in content creation like yourself, it's not lost on me that you had already made that connection of like, this is how it expressed itself and this is how the world saw me. But I wasn't ready to claim that identity in myself yet. And I'm still struggling with it now. So,
wow.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It's profound and it's so deep rooted in us. The definition of the identity of the artist. What is being an artist, right? And we have so many ideas on how an artist could be. And even sometimes when we recover and we heal some limiting beliefs, we may add some extra layers. Yeah. So it's such a process of shedding, layer after layer of what is actually an artist.
I've witnessed also that energy tends to manifest into the next level of limiting beliefs, which is imposter syndrome. Like once you have been paid for your stuff, once you can, in theory, you've met the criteria for your own title, then that the new fear manifests of like, yeah, but I'm not really legitimate and someone might discover me, and all the comparison and all of those fears start entering that space that you had just cleared out.
Yes, 100%. This is something that I experienced when I launched my first journal, because what happened is that after that turning point when I was 18 and said, okay, I'm going to reject completely the idea of being an artist, at least to the public's eye.
Yeah.
I was scared. I was scared of being an artist also because as a teenager, I was in rehab for a couple of years. I was healing my depression and anxiety and eating disorders. And just the idea of having that identity of the artist attached to me, it would be a trigger it is a possibility that you'll go down the rabbit hole again, right? And then when I was 24, 25, I was at Mind Valley. And I was getting deeper into journaling. And then when I started creating my journal, it was all just, it's just something that I'm doing for myself. And then you sell 500 units, you sell 1,000 units. and without really any paid promotion. It was mostly word of mouth. And, there was a time, and it still sometimes still comes back, right? When I'm in my creative process of, maybe it's actually easy to do, anybody else could do it. But truth is I know that when I am in that creation process, I'm so embedded to it, I'm so dedicated. But then at the end, I start doubting.
I feel like that's such a metaphor for life, and maybe not a metaphor, but a model for life, because when we go into those states where we start to feel all of the fears and all of the stories that we tell ourselves just get louder and louder, and it can manifest into anxiety, depression, self-harm, all of these things, we're not present. We're not in our bodies. We're in the past, regretting something or feeling shitty about something that happened, or we're in the future projecting that we're going to do something that we regret, or we're going to feel shitty. And part of the magic and the healing that is present in the creative process is that it forces you to be present. And when you're in your body and when you're with yourself and you're in the moment and you're observing how magical of an experience it is and how incredible it is that we even have the ability to translate our thoughts into something tangible, this energy or this magic or this flow state or whatever label you want to put on it is then invited into the space, and it feels like you're being held, right? It feels like you're not alone in that process. Then when it releases and you make your way to the end of whatever creative sprint you've just been through, that's when, the vacuum gets refilled with all of these voices. So I'm curious, from your perspective as somebody who has had to do a lot of personal development and personal growth and deep soul searching, because you were dealing with such heavy things at such a young age regarding the anxiety and depression and eating disorders. Like, how did you learn to shift your imagination and your creative energy away from something that was destructive for you and into something that was so not only productive, but generous and giving to the world, because you create tools to help other people do that for themselves?
There were a few, seeds that happened. The first one was an acid trip. It was.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that.
It was a birthday gift from one of my best friends, and we call him the trip advisor.
Mm-hmm. Seems fitting.
And and it was such a eye-opening experience, because it was reinforcing this identity or a part of me that wants to share and to capture and to recreate the beauty of being alive. So that was the time that I began to be more open again to the creative process. And I decided as well to start reading some books, including The Artist Way, The Big Magic, Still Like an Artist. And then there were two beliefs that I've developed as well throughout this time. The first one is to be okay with being a beginner. And the second belief is that creativity and ideas, they don't necessarily belong to me.
So when you had the powerful, intense trip, can you share a little bit about what that experience was like for you, and what wisdom were you able to source from that?
You're just so in the moment. It's about being amazed and wowed by what you are witnessing. And it can be as simple as looking at the sky, at witnessing just the movement of the clouds or the colors, the textures in that moment. It's all about emotion. And then with time, and right after the trip, it was like, wow, it's such a profound and beautiful, rich experience just to be human. Why not just to pay more attention, right? I believe that beauty is a form of therapy. And it's one of my, let's say, KPIs for me to check in with my own anxiety and depression. If I'm feeling low, I know that these are the moments when I notice that, for example, when I go and watch the sunset, I don't feel it in my heart, right? If the experience is not, if I'm not being touched by that beauty, then I know that probably I am in a lower frequency.
How do you raise your frequency? Like when you're in that state and you start to notice it, how do you catch it and shift it and redirect that energy into something that's going to energize and support your being able to be present, your being able to access that creative energy instead of that manifesting into creative ways to sabotage or self-destruct?
For me, it's through practices, awareness first.
Yeah.
So cultivating a morning practice that was life changing to me. And that morning practice is writing, journaling, and meditation. So just taking some time in my day just to sit down with whatever comes, emotions, thoughts, and embrace them first. Because now I'm beginning, right, to learn and be brave enough to actually sit with all there is. I mean, it's still it's a journey, right? But I remember not that long time ago, it was something that I would push away. I'll be like, oh, this is happening. I will ignore, or I will pretend it doesn't happen, or I will find, another way to channel this energy to something else. Yeah. So I would say that the first thing is just to embrace, to sit with it. And then also to know that it's okay. Life is a cycle.
In terms of how you were able to shift your perspective on yourself and the way that you show up in the world and where you're deciding to put your time and energy, you mentioned a few really key books, right? Like The Artist's Way and Big Magic and, these like seminal works. Anything that Austin Kleon has wrote, Steal Like an Artist is a classic. But I'm curious also, having come from such a strong community background and shared experience background. You mentioned in your childhood how much you were dancing and acting and just involved in the sense of community. And then Mindvalley also has a very strong community aspect to the tribe that they've built around the products that they sell and the ethos of the company. So I'm curious, as you transitioned into more of the life that you have now, what was the role of community in that process? Like, who or what did you build up around you to support you in staying in that state so you didn't slide back down into the swamps that you spent a lot of time in when you were younger?
Yeah, great question. Community, it's been everything, because when I was young, I felt that I was alone somehow in the journey, right? I didn't, like my colleagues, they were not really thinking, oh, when I grow up, I will be an artist, or I am an artist, right? And then the big shift was when I was at Mindvalley. I feel that it was the first time that I was in an environment that it was so rich in meeting and creating relationships with like-minded people. And that developed my own confidence and self-esteem in different areas of life, including in my ability to create, and then meeting people that were already developing as well those parts of me that I wanted to. It gave me hope. It gave me inspiration and courage, So community has definitely shaped and shaped my courage to actually to step in and begin the journey, because that was only the beginning.
Yeah. And when did you find these tools like The Artist's Way and Big Magic? How did that enter into the journey?
Community.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, The Artist's Way, it was, the first person like, oh, you should read the artist way. Have you heard about morning pages, like journaling? And then it comes second person speaking about the same book. And then when it's the third person, like, okay, I surrender. I need to find this book, read it, and begin my practice of stream of consciousness. So it was very much the community power that led me into these books. Actually, I was not even searching. It feels like those ideas, they were coming my way. And saying, like, knocking on the door, like, hey, don't forget about me. It's time.
Yeah. I think one of the things that happens when you start shifting your perspective is that your point of view starts to widen. So the things that were in the periphery that were always there, you couldn't see them yet, and as you go through that process of expansion and opening yourself up, things start to enter into that field, but you can perceive them now. And there's so many instances when I reflect on my life and when I've been in conversation with other people where it's like, yeah, that thing was there all along, just waiting for you to notice it, waiting for you to create space for it, right? I feel that way about our inner artists. Like, we have them and we're in touch with them when we're children. And then we start to silence them and push them down because we feel that they're a threat or a liability. Right. And it's something that doesn't necessarily enhance us because there's too much risk involved in that because of all of the cultural stories that we've told ourselves. So the only place where that feels safer is in the world of business. Right. And that's why we even have this term of like creatives as a job title. Right.
Exactly.
It's like, it's a little bit bizarre because it doesn't mean anything necessarily. But it feels like it's a place where we've moved creativity so that it feels more structured and secure and safer. And, if you're a professional creative, let's say you're a graphic designer, you'll get a steady paycheck, but you can still be creative, and so we've moved it into this capitalistic space that is so deeply connected with money. And in that process, we've stripped away a lot of the healing benefits of that because, the way that you design your life and your day and your energy flows and where your attention is placed, the work that you do with journaling and all of the different ways that you support that is so healing. It's so essential for us to rebuild that relationship with our inner creative and our inner artist so that we can reclaim that and learn how to use that energy as a superpower to design our whole lives. And that's the beating heart of the work that I want to do, is helping creativity feel less elitist and intimidating and threatening. And instead be like, no, why can't it be playful and joyous and expansive? Because it's all of those things too. Like, it's a very interesting dance. And I think what I mentioned earlier about what Corey brought up in a previous interview around the power structures shifting and creativity being rewarded through social media is a whole other way of being an artist in the world, where you don't need to have permission from all of the people that you needed to have permission for, because each one of us can be our own content creation agency.
Exactly. What a time to be alive, right? Yeah. I would not even dream about, when I would be on my 20s or 30s, that would be, somehow easy to express yourself in so many different ways. And I find that it's it's definitely a blessing. So many of us, we don't even sometimes believe that we are creative.
Yeah.
Right. Because one thing is being an artist, like, again, the division, right? Another thing is, how can you just apply your creative energy, that it's just life force, to everything in life, just like you mentioned, from your business to your relationships to everything.
Yeah. It's been an interesting journey for me also to get to this place and to see how important integration is for authentic creative expression, right? Like I come from tech startup businessy world. So like when you say KPIs, I understand what that means, right? But at the same time, you're talking about KPIs for a healthy life and a life well lived, right? Like that's not how key performance indicators get spoken about in Silicon Valley or any of these other places. And on my journey also, because I had leaned too hard into my masculine power structures, systems, like all of this rigidity. And in my process of healing from that lifestyle, I actually became a health coach. And I really was like, okay, I've been in my head this whole time. Now I need to drop into my body. But in that process, I discovered how essential that is. But becoming a health coach didn't feel totally aligned with me. There was some kind of blend or combination that needed to be created, but that I didn't have a model for. And so it allowed space for my creativity of like, how do I blend all of these things that I intuitively know are so important in helping people move through a transformation, both in their personal life and oftentimes in their professional life. But how do I do that in a way that feels cohesive and something that I can clearly articulate to invite people into this experience? And it took me many years of dancing with my creativity, of feeling like an imposter, of feeling like, oh, well, the only explanation for why this doesn't exist is because it's impossible and I can't do it. And, kind of the ups and downs and high highs and low lows that are part of creating anything that is, in my opinion, worth expressing into the world in a way that can be received and other people can benefit from it. But it is a long, windy, far from linear process. And I would love to hear about your transition from being in a position that from the outside looks like you made it. Right? You're probably making good money. You have lots of prestige. You look beautiful. You look like you're having fun. You make it look easy, like all of the things that so many people aspire to. And then I'm curious what caused you to then say, no, I'm ready to go do my own thing and to move into the entrepreneurial space, which inherently is very risky. And there's a lot of unknowns. And fear of the unknown is also known as anxiety. But how did you get to a place where you felt that was the move for you? And then how did you support yourself as an independent entrepreneur coming from a place that you were so embedded in community?
Great question. It was a mess. It's still a mess. And I had no idea what I was doing.
But it looked so good from the outside.
And it was a process of death of my ego and so many parts of me. Leaving Mind Valley, it was painful. I was so attached to that identity. And my biggest fear was to lose community. I've been looking my whole life for this community. And now that I found it, why am I leaving? Yeah. And honestly, I didn't know. Oh, wow. I just felt, I started having visions and I felt it so deeply in my core that, Juma, you're just too safe now. And it's time to make a leap of faith and go to the jungle. I don't know why I always had this idea, like it's time for you to actually go out there. And I never, ever wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was an idea. It was like, it's never for me. Even though I've already had the seed, and I had some entrepreneurs in my family. And I remember my dad telling me, even when I was working in a multinational, in Unilever, like, oh, you'll have your own company someday. I'm like, never. Just too much of responsibility and the risk. Like, I like structure. I like to have my monthly paycheck. When I decided to make this move, I had no idea what I was doing. I was so lost. I still am in a way in finding my way, but I had faith and I had trust in myself. And even when people, and people around you are like, what are you doing with your life? Like, just had the best job ever, you're just, what a lifestyle. Come on, I was in my early 20s and it was faith. And it's hard. I remember even my mom, she was like, so after a year, when do you find a real job? Maybe it's time, because it was difficult. I also struggled financially for quite some time, and I had to learn to ask for help again. And I was privileged enough to be surrounded by people that I could ask support. Yeah, it's an ongoing journey, definitely. But it's a lot about, for me, it's been a lot about deconstructing who I am outside of these identities, even as an artist, like everything, just ripping that apart.
Yeah, that's the messy, I refer to it often as like broken into 1,000 pieces kind of experience. I visualize it almost as like picking up each of the pieces and looking at it and being like, is this me? And if so, like, where does this fit? What is this configuration? And you kind of just try combinations until you get that sensation of like, okay, I picked up the scent. I'm on to something. Like I need to follow this thread. So do you remember when that started to gel for you, particularly around creating? At first, I think it was called My Life Journal, right? And then it morphed into Prophsee.
Prophsee.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about how you went from that, like, I'm totally lost, to being more found, with the understanding that when I talk about the art of lost and found, I'm not talking about the art of arrival. I'm not talking about like, now I'm here, I got it, done. Being found does not mean you're at your destination. It just means you're oriented to where you came from and where you want to go. So that's why it's an art, right? It's an ongoing process. So can you share a little bit about how you went from that, I have no idea what I'm doing, into then being able to pick up on that sense and then build something from there?
It was a mindset shift that there was another turning point.
Yeah.
Or a pivotal moment when I was in Barcelona. That was 2-3 years ago. And I was in a seminar of Mind Valley, actually, with Neil Donald Walsh. And his book, Conversations with God, book 1, was one of the books that impacted my life so much, because I also grew up in a multicultural background, so not with a specific idea of what is God or even religion. So I went searching that myself. And in that seminar, Neil, he says that actually life is not really about you, right? It's about everyone that you touch. And that's when I realized that I could combine my life story, my own struggles, and my passions to contribute to other people's lives, and also to be the person that I needed when I was younger. And that was when it was no longer about me. And that was when I realized that it was a time for me to overcome my own fears they were me based, and instead focus on service and on how I can give these tools that have been so powerful for me and so many people that I've met and that I witnessed as well, their growth, and to be a voice and someone who is marching for a vision and the mission. So I don't see myself necessarily as an entrepreneur. That's an easy label. But I do see myself in a mission and walking this journey with many other people. Thanks God. For me, that was a turning point, was this mindset shift that actually it's not about me. It's really about contribution.
And then getting that to a place where you were able to complete a project, because I think there is definitely a gap between having the mindset shift and actually being able to commit and take that idea all the way to the form of execution. Because, and especially what you did, you created a physical product. And as someone who understands this space, like that is a huge undertaking. There's so many moving pieces to creating something tangible that is values aligned and that like the whole supply chain actually works. So can you share a little bit, like how did you iterate through that? Did you bring in other people to help you materialize this vision? Like, how did you get from the vision, I'm committed, I want to do this, to the actual, I have this in my hand now?
Again, I had no idea what I was doing. I asked money from my parents first to produce because I didn't have that money available.
Yeah.
With the promise like, okay, I really believe in this, and blah, blah, blah. So definitely I had plenty of support. But then I also realized that actually, the mission is not so much about producing a product, because for me, it's also part of my art. It's my therapy, actually.
Yeah.
I test and I make my own journals, and then creating these journals for other people, they can too benefit from that. But it was also about the educational part of it. Having a vision and seeing like, hey, like there is yoga, there is meditation, there's so many practices out there. And why journaling? Like why you don't have teachers all over the world, teaching this therapy that had such a huge impact in my life, and it's just a tool, right? But it's a practice, and then we become the practice. So it's been a journey. I'm still on the journey, but it's I think sometimes I only had the courage to take that leap of faith and act on it because I didn't know the struggles that would face afterwards.
Yes.
Sometimes the not knowing.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like that's part of the creative process. And we can see that so clearly in children, right? Like before that channel gets disrupted, like they have no idea what they're getting into most of the time. Right. And I think that's part of what makes the barrier to entry in this creative space so low. Perhaps that ignorance or that lack of awareness of all of the struggles. But as we become more traditionally educated and grow up, we are taught so much about risk and about safety and about structures and about how you are supposed to be, that it creates all of these pre-problems, all of the things that could turn into problems. And that fills so much of our chamber that I love the just going for it mentality, where you have enough structure, enough safety that, you manage your risk to some degree, right? Like you borrowed from your parents, not the bank. Like that might be a little bit more flexible in terms of the terms.
Yeah, exactly. And I would ask myself often, like, what is the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'll run out of money. Fine. After 10 years, I'll go back to my parents' place. Fine. Blah, 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 blah. And most of the scenarios, they happen.
Yeah. So perhaps maybe in one of the things that you said earlier, particularly around the need to shift your energy away from it being about you and more into it being about service. And also as part of that, and you mentioned this particularly in the context of the acid trip around the ego death. I think a lot of times people are blocked with moving forward because of self-confidence issues, but also because of just fear that what if it doesn't work out? So can you speak a little bit to potentially it not working out and how that feels and what that experience is, and then how you move past that?
Exactly. Yeah. I guess that so many of us, we have goal setting, but sometimes we forget about the fear setting, right? This is something that even Tim Ferriss speaks about, and understanding that because often we don't move, so often, so many things, the little things in life, we don't say that word or we don't act in a particular way because we are scared. And how do we digest? And how do we embrace? How do we turn our fear into fuel? So it's an ongoing journey. And for me, it was so much, and being someone who likes to journal and having structure, it was for me to organize this worst case scenario. And if that happens, and what are my alternatives? I think this is something as well that it comes with experience and growing up, is that sometimes we just feel so stuck and we are scared because we think that's it. But I also have the privilege of living in this time, right? And knowing that even if that happens, I'm sure that it's the best that could happen as well for my own growth and for my own journey, is to see my valleys and my downtime as well as part of the story. And also it is a blessing. In the moment, it doesn't feel like it.
Oh, no.
But trust.
Yeah. I think there's something really powerful about the perspective that age brings, right? Like I remember my first heartbreak. Oh God. I thought that was it for me. That was the end. I was never going to be okay again. And, fortunately, unfortunately, I have had many breakups since that first one. And I know that there is a process that I go through and then I'm okay. Right? Like it's that perspective and that understanding that, yes, the way that I feel is true for me right now, for sure. I acknowledge that. I accept that. But I also take it in context and understand it's not going to be like this forever. We are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, exactly. This is something that we know for sure, is that there is always change. Change is just part of life. And even sometimes when we go through really tough moments and we feel like, I will never be the same again. But that's the point.
Yeah.
Like last year, it was a very rough year for me, emotionally speaking. In my Saturn return, there was a lot of destroying parts of me that were no longer serve me, and going deeper into a healing journey and healing my inner child wounds. And I felt like I will never be the same again. Like, will I even have that joy, that innocence? And maybe yes, maybe no, but maybe the scar will be always there, but it doesn't mean that you have to be defined by that. And trusting that was a blessing as well.
Yeah, beautiful. So in all of this reflecting that we've done and all of this journeying from, little Juma playing with her friends and in her neighborhood all the way to now the deep transformation and all of these other tools that you've brought in to help you through that transformation. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice that you would love to share with your younger self, or perhaps somebody who's at an earlier stage of their journey? Something that you wish you would have heard?
That there is no such thing as failure, and that the focus, instead of being on the outcome, on the destination, is really about the process, and falling in love with the daily blessings and struggles and the little things, that it's really our life is our days, right? Or our life is our days in miniature. So just giving myself permission to just be on this journey in my imperfect, perfect self, and embracing this wabi-sabi of life and finding beauty in unexpected places inside out.
And for those who aren't familiar with wabi-sabi, can you just give a little bit of context?
Wabi-sabi is a Japanese word that describes our ability to appreciate beauty in everything in life, and especially in the broken things.
And my final question for you is just an open space. Is there anything that came up in this conversation or feels important to share or speak to that we haven't touched on yet?
The first thing that comes to mind is the importance of having the courage of embracing our inner creative power to whatever way you want to channel that in life. I just feel that this is one of the biggest superpowers of being human and of this human experience. And it's there sitting for us. And it's our decision to choose to cultivate it or not. And I feel that life is so much better when we embrace. It's just more delightful, right? And there's so many new shades of colors and shapes that comes in life when we embrace our creative genius.
Absolutely. I'm right there with you. It's a superpower that we all have, that many of us have disconnected from or forgotten that it's there. When we get back in touch with that and integrate it into the people that we are now, it's truly incredible what kind of magic and possibility gets unlocked in that process. I love that. That feels like a perfect kind of way to encapsulate the larger experience. It's worth it. It's worth it.
It is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show and for showing up so wholly and so vulnerably and with such hard-earned wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brooke, for creating as well this space, this safe space for us to have these conversations that I feel that many of us have the longing. It's like, actually, this is something that I would love to discuss and talk about. And you creating this space, it is sacred. And I am sure that it will impact many people's lives in a very beautiful, deep way. Even your guests, I'm already impacted by your work just by this conversation. So thank you. I'm grateful for you.
Thanks.
And I also look forward to witness more of your magic and beauty and creations and just the depth of your being that is huge.
Thank you. And for anybody who wants to follow along on your journey and your continuous creative evolution, where would be the best place to connect with you?
Instagram, Ana Juma. That's the best place. Yeah. And then from there, we can take a journey.
Well, thank you so much. You've made my day. I feel radiant right now.
Me too. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.